Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's Coffee Talk. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. We will send out a link to today's from today's presentation with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. It'll probably be on Tuesday. I'm not sure if we'll get it done today, and then with the holiday on Monday, it might be Tuesday, but we will get that out to everyone. My name's Sean O'Brien, the president of QuickRate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Sean said my name is Steve Huntington. I'm a director of analytics here, QwickAnalytics. I have spent pretty much my entire career working with community banks and financial institutions on everything from strategic planning, evaluation, M&A, capital planning, model design, and a little bit of everything else. And been working with Sean for a little over a decade now and taking some of those tools and putting them into the environment that we're working in QwickAnalytics.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Just a reminder, use the Q&A box, use the chat feature. We'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. Today, we're going to start with a few polling questions just to kind of get a sense for where everybody is with the transition. And, I'm going to go ahead and launch those now, or at least a couple of them, and then we'll kind of take those. So the first one is, have you completed your day one analysis, right? So year end, still running the CECL, but also need to do that comparison to see how, if any, changes might be required from CECL. So we'll just give this about 30 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and move on.
And if you don't see it, it may be popped up on a different monitor. It should be a little pop-up window, and find it somewhere in your screen array.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Lori. If you are using two monitors, it might pop up on your second monitor. Okay. All right. So that's great. Thanks for everybody for participating. So we did see about 80% half, so that's fantastic. Again, I think still plenty of time, but that's very, very, very good to see. The next one is again kind of curious. Whoops. There we go. All right. Let's see if I can get this one to launch here. Was your day one comparison, or do you anticipate your day one comparison to be higher, lower, or roughly the same as your current CECL? So let me go ahead and try to launch this. I'm not sure why it's not launching. There we go. Again, so was your day one comparison, or do you anticipate to be higher, lower, roughly the same? So we'll just give this again about 30 seconds and see where everybody is. You can tell I'm a little bit of a novice here at the polling questions, so I'm working through it. Working through a cold and working through the polling questions. So thanks for your patience. All right. This is fantastic. Again, thanks for everybody for participating. So what interesting, about 50% of it are about the same. 25% are higher and lower, which is really fascinating. So
Yeah.
That's great to see. All right, and now just a few more questions. Let me make sure I share that, and let me come back to the next question. Is number 3, did your Q factors change at all? As part of your day one analysis, did your Q factors change? Again, for many of you, given the previous answer, I suspect they didn't. But yes, for a lot of you, the Q factors are still substantiating or defending a lot of your reserve. So again, we'll just give this about 30 seconds. Okay, almost 50-50. Looks like we're going to end at about 52% of you said yes, and about 48% of you said no. So let me go ahead and share those results. Let me just check this real quick. There is a question, how many people are on the call? 143, Katie. So just for your.
Yeah, I'm a math guy, as you probably, if you've met me before, know. So it was a great question.
Yeah. Yeah. So 143. All right. And then the next question, let me stop sharing that one, that I want to launch then is what, at this point, what do you see as your biggest challenge remaining to, kind of implement and transition CECL? Again, we're trying to focus on and make sure our coffee talks are reflective of any concerns or issues you've had. I know Steve and I have both, been on the phone or the Zoom and responding to emails about, issues or questions people have. So I think, not only today, but we're going to invite hopefully Paul Allen again from Saltmarsh on next month, to talk about what remaining issues many people might see. And so this will be, again, informative and helpful for us. So thank you for all for participating. So we'll just give this a few more seconds. All right, I think this probably kind of falls in line with what we thought. All right, let me just go ahead and end this. So about 68% of you said external acceptance, either from your regulator or your auditor, 11% about additional provision necessary, 25% on just the accuracy of the calculations, and then 8% were none. So I'll go ahead and share those as well. And then let's see, let me move on. I just got a couple more, so I think this has been fantastic. Finally, 2 questions left, so thanks for your patience. As a result of CECL, did you need to make a provision for your held to maturity securities portfolio? Again, what we found with most of you is that typically none of us are really holding, probably maybe 10 or 15% of us are holding something that's, kind of atypical, meaning that there actually is the potential for some credit risk. So, I'm curious this, I think, again, we kind of know.
You're anticipating the answer, Sean,
Yes, definitely feel like I know the way the winds are blowing, but I will say it's come up quite a bit in the last week. Yeah. So felt like we needed to make sure we weren't missing something. So again, thank you all for answering. 93% of you said no, 7% said yes. So I'll share these results with you as well. So thank you. And let's see, final question. Do you think you would benefit now or in the future from, more loan level granularity in your analysis? Again, here, what we're trying to, continue to monitor and evolve is our tool. I think we're looking for additional functionality that you might find helpful. We think we have some decent ideas, particularly with our IntelliCredit solution. But we're just, again, curious from all of our users kind of where everybody is, landing on this. So, and I think we'll certainly, after the transition, will be something we'll start to focus a little bit more on and introduce some other ideas. So, okay. Let me just give it a few more seconds. Again, thank you all for the participation. This is really, really quite good. And so we appreciate that. So a little bit evenly split. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. So 34% said yes, 21% said no, and 45% not sure. So good. Again, that'll be something that we'll certainly address, kind of later this year, are some things that we hope you'll find will be helpful. And then certainly willing to take any input from all of you, excuse me, around anything you might find additionally helpful. All right, so fantastic. That's a great way to start today. A couple of questions and chats have come in, so we'll just go ahead and take these now. is the amount of shortfall excess from the day one analysis the amount that has to be recorded in the fourth quarter? Is there flexibility in the guidance to record the transition amount using the first quarter 2023 analysis? So, I mean, I would say what you really want to do is compare as a, essentially 1-1, right? You're going to compare your 1231 ALLL with essentially the 1-1 value that your CECL analysis did. And if you have a shortfall, then you'd want to make that adjustment. When we get to the first quarter, then we're kind of in the same thing where we're just going to continue to monitor and use the ACL or CECL guidance going forward, and you'll make provisions much like you have traditionally in the ALLL. Steve, anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, if the question's more along the lines of just, can that day one adjustment, is there any flexibility with the day one adjustment being spread out or partially recorded at a later date that does include maybe March 31st or whatnot? My understanding is no, is that day one, I believe from the exact standard, and then what the FDIC and the OCC controller's handbook and some of the other references that continue to talk about that guidance say is it's on the first day of your accounting year is when that day one adjustment, because from that day the standard has to be in effect for this entire year, which means your adjustment, which takes your non-CECL appropriate reserve and makes it a CECL accepted reserve, has to be dated as of the first day of the accounting year. So the only flexibility is for people who have non 1231 fiscal years. That's the only, those are the only people that aren't making their day one adjustment. Now, again, people are making that day one adjustment throughout the first quarter, right? Throughout the first 3 months of this year. And from an accounting standpoint, backdating it to be as of, right, January 1st.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Question came in. Our auditors recommend obtaining a SOC report and a CECL model validation from you. We do have our SOC 1 under the resources tab.
Yep.
Up in one of the blue boxes. If you look at the CECLSolver resources, you will see our SOC 1 report there. All right, so let's take a look at this. A couple other things came through in the chat. Yeah, they want the entry to be done 2023 January. Yep. Okay, I think we've gotten those, so let's kind of move on. Built-in a range for day one is underfunded, but within a range of -5 to 10%. Yeah, again, I think thresholds are important about what your policies are, and making sure whether you want to make an additional provision. Okay, so one of the things that we want to continue to talk about here is just, as we move into 2023, and we're really not as much in the comparison mode, we'll actually be in the implementation and ongoing use of the ACL or CECL. We wanted to talk about and just remind you again of some updates that we've made. We will continue to probably make updates throughout the year. We'll try to communicate those as best we can, not only through the coffee talks, but through emails as well. But here are a few of them that I think we touched on some last month, but want to make sure everybody is aware of. So, Steve, I'll let you talk first on anything you want to add before I move the slide.
Yeah, I typically update these bullet points in sort of a running list. So the ones at the top are the ones you're probably most familiar with if you've been on previous coffee talks or you're actively using the tool. The ones at the bottom are sort of the newest. But so we've had an enhanced version of the Excel-based warm estimator tool out for at least a couple months now, and I think about 3 months or so. And that is where we decided we wanted to give another alternative for warms that took into account amortization assumptions in a more detailed way, resulting in more aggressive or lower warm calculations, or a little bit less conservative, you might call it that, but still totally appropriate under the CECL standard and easily defensible. So that enhanced version has been out there for a while. What we call the complete bank historical data set, which is just simply if you wanted a data dump of all your historical data for every single quarter going back to the dinosaurs, then we can do that in Excel. So we have people who are if you're trying to do, a couple spot checks on, following the math completely from cradle to grave, with every number to sort of continue validating the tool and whatnot, we wanted to make sure you had an option to do that. So in the export options of a tool at the bottom, there's a button for to download the complete historical data set. Data file upload, we shared this last month, but it's been out for about 6 weeks or so, I think. That's just another tab on the tool that allows you to add any ancillary materials, right? If you have some additional narrative that you've done in a Word document or an Excel file, or you have some other economic data that you want to kind of keep organized along with your ACL calculations, you can upload and save files and sort of attach them to the tool. It's just a purely administrative function to help you guys organize everything that would be required in part of it, for an audit or an exam, or just you keeping all your ACL or CECL resources organized in one spot. Policy templates, talked about it last month. They are live as of, I believe, last night or today. So right on the main page, there's the button for CECLSolver resources. Right on the main page for CECL. You can click on that, and now there'll be two versions, two different alternatives. They're both Word documents. We worked with some auditing firms and got some and kind of revised some language, and we didn't want to try to rebuild the wheel. So they're not 80-page long templates. They're short and sweet, and hopefully get the ball rolling for y'all.
Yeah, let me just make a comment too, Steve, on the
Sure.
policy templates. So again, last month we talked about those. We sent those out as part of the link to the recordings. We went back and forth on whether to put them out on the website. I think we had enough interest from all of you to do so. I think a couple of things about policy templates and just policies in general, right? There's definitely a lot of theories on this. I think, as Steve mentioned, our goal was not necessarily, this is a little bit out of what we normally would do, but because of the requests we had, we went to work on it. But there is a philosophy with templates and policies, right? Some people, and I think I probably subscribe to this to a certain point, is to be probably a little less voluminous and allow a third party to make recommendations to your policy, rather than try to say too much. If you remember, Paul Allen talked about policies in December and said, hey, let's not, restate the CECL guidance. So we, again, as Steve mentioned, we consulted with, friends of ours, who are in the auditing profession, and tried to put together some ideas to kind of get you started. And then I think you can make those your own, and then still, allow the opportunity if your auditors or your regulators want to make suggestions to those, they can certainly do that. So, but given the response we had and the reception we had on those, we did put those now finally out on the website. All right, Steve, sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's all right. That's what we're here for. Next one, and this went live just recently, along with the availability of all the 1231 financial data, both for your banks as well as for the entire peer universe. And this is one that came directly from feedback that we've got on these coffee talks and other webinars. So the more feedback we get, the better. And we do really build the tool around what our users are asking for. Current loan balances for new and existing scenarios can now be automatically updated. So that one thing that we were asking you to do each quarter, when you pulled up an old scenario from last quarter and you were updating it, right, for the new quarter, let's say that you had you filed your next quarter's call report, and we're asking you to type in your current loan balances for your updated analysis. That was something that you used to have to do manually. So, I mean, yes, it was only, a handful of numbers, but it was something that we didn't have an automated way to pull in, to refresh the current loan balances for any historical period. So it's really not just this period, but for if you want to automatically click a button and have your current balances reflect any point in history that you want to, and not have to type them all in, now that's part of a tool. So on your summary page, right where you see the current loan balances column, there's a date box on top that you can click on and choose any historical call report date that you want. It still functions as it used to. If you want to do this, if you want to do an analysis as of January 31st, you can override the 12/31 by just simply typing in January 31st. Obviously, you'd have to manually type in your balances from January 31st because that's not a publicly available call report date. So the enhanced functionality is simply, if you choose any historical period end date, the balances will auto update and you don't have to type them in. So just a time saver. New discrete loan balance adjustments column. Yes. So this is going to be here, I believe, next week. These last two items, maybe a couple weeks, maybe the week after. Something else we got asked a lot. Right now, if you have certain loan balances that are outside the scope of CECL, like a small held for sale portfolio or some government guaranteed SBA type loans, and any balances that you're sort of backing out of your total balance because you don't want to, there's no potential for losses there. It used to be where right now you back those balances out manually, and then you just make a note saying, hey, we backed out $1 million of, PPP loans we still have at a CNI or what have you. There's going to be a new column for all the adjustments. So you'll be able to see right there, you don't have to manually override your balance. You'll see your stated balance. You'll see any adjustments that you want to type in, and then it'll do the math by subtracting the adjustments. So just clearer and more straightforward than it was the enhancement there. And that'll be within the next couple weeks here that'll be live on the system. And then finally, and I have a screenshot of that in just a second. Finally, the way we design the tool, on the summary page, I think probably, Sean, we might want to go to the mock-up of it now while we're talking about this. So here we go. These are the things that I was just talking about. Letter A there is that current balance column, and you can click on that date and choose a historical period, and it'll auto update all the loan balances. Letter B, adjustments and exclusions. That's what I was just talking about. So it's a brand new column. You don't have to override your 45 million in this case. You can type in your adjustment right there as a separate discrete column. We had a lot of questions or a lot of requests for that. And then C, at the bottom of the summary of the CECL page, when we were building the tool and over the last couple of years, what people needed most was they wanted to get a feel for what the overall impact with CECL was going to be, right? What's the total shortfall or surplus I'm going to have for all the elements that comprise CECL, which was not just the current loan portfolio, but also maybe your securities portfolio, and also maybe something from unfunded commitments. And so we added those all together to get a total CECL impact on your reserves calculation. Well, now that we're in the nitty gritty of it, and what's more important are the actual accounting entries, and your adjustment for your securities portfolio is on a separate part of the balance sheet from your reserve, and your unfunded commitments adjustment is in a separate part of the balance sheet from your reserve. So there are three discrete line items on your call report on the balance sheet that you're going to be making these calculations on now that CECL is live, so to speak. So we're just adjusting the bottom of the pages there to reflect this is the ACL that you need on the loan portfolio, because that's where you're doing your provision and reserve calculating for. And then on the securities portfolio is where you'll see your surplus or shortfall for the securities, if they have any. It's only 7% of you, I guess. And then on the unfunded commitments, same thing. So no change in the basic math or how the tool works. We're just kind of displaying it in a way that matches up more with how you're actually going to be filling this out on the call reports and financials going forward. So hopefully that'll be helpful as well.
Great, Steve. We got a couple of questions that came in. One was, do overdrafts need to be included in the CECL calculation?
So they do. Overdrafts are the easiest way to think about anything that would be filled out as a loan on your call report, right? So actual overdraft loans are, I believe, in the unsecured. So all other consumer loans, Sean, I think that's the call report bucket. And so if you have $1 million in all other consumer loans and they're from overdrafts, you do have to estimate potential losses on that. The methodology, I think the second part of the question was that do you just reserve the full amount, right? Well, that would be an assumption that entire overdraft will not be paid back. Hopefully that's not the case most of the time. So yeah, you're going to have higher potential losses on that, on that part of consumer loans, which is typically what we see in the peer data too. But it's treated no differently than any other segment of your loan portfolio, pretty much.
Great. So Cindy checked, it doesn't look like our policies are out there, so we'll check on that after the presentation, but our intention, Steve, maybe you can check it now, but certainly our hope was to have it out there today. And if not, then we'll get it out there over the weekend.
It'll be tonight if it wasn't. It should have rolled in today, but we have to check. A lot of times everyone's system is cached and you have to kick the cache out for new updates to pop up. So we'll check into that as we're done here.
Yeah. So the next question is our CECL analysis shows a 0 reserve requirement as year-end. We want to maintain our current reserve without adjustment. Are you aware of any other banks in a similar situation that won't be making a starting CECL adjustment? Yeah, I think that's kind of what was one of our thoughts on the polling question, is that there are a number of banks, and I think it was half almost, who essentially their ALLL reserve kind of lined up with what CECL was calling for. So, I think that's been kind of anecdotally what we had sensed from discussions with our banks as we were going through this. And I think today kind of confirmed that. So I think, yeah, I would say most, or not most, but half of our bank clients are not really seeing an increase or decrease to their reserve.
Yeah. I see the same thing. Sean, we get, we talk about that a lot with banks. And if you haven't had any loss experience in your portfolio over the last handful of years, your current ALLL, your old school ALLL, is already completely justified by qualitative factor adjustments. And CECL inherently won't be any different, right? You'll still be making your entire reserve has to be justified by how you're adjusting your completely zero historical loss experience. And you can't, you can only get you can't get blood from a stone. So if you just don't have any historical experience to go on, so you have to look at the peer experience, go outside your four walls, look for potential risk in the marketplace around you by looking at the peer data, by looking at economic data, and by using the same basic arguments you would have used a year and a half ago in justifying your ALLL reserve. But we certainly see that there's lots of institutions that have a historical lifetime loss rate of 0 right now. I mean, the median net charge-off ratio for community banks is 0.00. Median, meaning at least 50% of community banks in the entire United States have 0.00% net charge-offs. So yeah, that's where we are.
Right. And that actually is good. Great point, Steve. Right. I mean, if you actually look at the net charge-off data, it's not surprising that half of you aren't really seeing any difference, and certainly seeing numbers that are supported or defended by Q factors. So this is just like a follow-up to what Steve was saying on the HTM page. Steve, here again, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Which is this? What was this?
Oh, sorry, I was looking at questions. I was looking through the chat.
No, I mean, this is the same. So the only change to the HTM securities is right now we have a spot where it shows what your ACL would need to be for the securities, and then any surplus or shortfall was shown on the summary page. But we don't want to continue conflating the loan portfolio with the securities portfolio, right? So now the only addition is you'll have your any existing ACL for your HTM securities also showing up on the HTM securities tab, and then the difference, right? Your surplus or shortfall will also show up there. So right now that's going to be 0 for most of you, because right now until March 31st you won't have a call report value for an existing ACL for HTM securities, right? The first quarter is the first time you'll be filling that out. Once you have filled that out, then there'll be a value here. And if each quarter you come in to, adjust or update your any potential losses on securities, you'll see where your current reserve is, and then you'll see where you need to be, and any difference will be your surplus or shortfall. So
and again,
it works. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying again, this is a small percentage of you, right? 7% talked about even needing a reserve. Just a couple of points that I know have come up in discussions I've had with banks. For many of you, for those of you who do hold like a corporate bond or something, most of your bond shops can provide you with, charge off or loss history on, bonds based on a rating. So probably a good place to ask if you have some of those and are looking for ideas on, what might be a reasonable or, defendable reserve. So just an FYI that's come up. But again, from the majority of you, this is not or probably will ever be much of an issue, but should it come up, that's
Kip, I'm gonna jump on
Whoops.
David's comment question first, Sean, and then we can
Yeah.
go up to the Q&A because it's related. The question is, will the date for the loan loss reserves that's at the bottom of the summary page there, will it update with the date for the loan portfolio, right? So go up one slide, Sean, so we can see all that at once. Yeah. So the question was all the way in the bottom right there where it has your current or most recent ACL or ALLL, and there's a date as of 12/31. He's asking, is that going to kind of link and sync with the date up top for the current loan balances? No, it's not going to link and sync, just because I want to make sure that if you're typing in a date or choosing a date, if you're overriding with a non-quarter end date like January 31st at the top there, and then you're going down and you're typing in all your loan balances, if the date on the bottom right also changes to January 31st automatically, and you don't remember to go and change the reserve value to also be January 31st, you'll be apples and oranges and you won't even know it. So we want to make sure that we're going to keep those two dates separate, just so as a reminder that you can see, oh, well, I haven't updated the reserve as of that non-quarter end date because I haven't typed in the date next to it. So that's why, yeah, we could link and sync them. I'm just worried that's going to cause more problem than help. But it is a good question. And that'll be all coming in the next couple of weeks here is when this new slightly different functionality is going to pop up.
Great. Another question came in. We started running parallel in 21, have been building our reserves. Should we still perform a day and document a day one calculation? Yes, I would. I would still perform that comparison. Next up, unplanned overdrafts are reported in line 9B, other loans per call report instructions. Thank you for that, Lisa. And then Steve, I think this is the one you just answered from David, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
No.
Well, no, it was, from David. So the next one is Tim was asking if we've heard of the FRB or the FDIC having an issue.
Well,
with
I think, Steve, I think it was just our slide because the loss rate says credit union in the slide. I think it was just a oversight on us. That's just
yeah. That so again, we have a mirror version of this tool for credit unions, and that page I snapshotted from there because we're still developing the bank side. So
yeah, I was gonna say that was just an oversight to the.
I stole the screenshot, but
yeah, exactly. We just didn't clean that up.
I appreciate the eagle eye.
Exactly, that's what I said. I appreciate the apologies for the oversight, but
if that's the actual question, there is an interesting substantive question about whether if we've heard about if people are using credit union data ever, if the bank regulators have a question with that. And the reason I think that's an interesting question is because the NCUA has put forth some very helpful guidance for warm values and for prepayment assumptions to use in calculating warm values, and organize it by call report segment. It's the credit union call report segments, but it's the most detailed and helpful guidance that we've seen for warm related stuff by far from any entity. And I realize it's the NCUA and not the FDIC, but if people are looking for more justification, more backup for the warm calculations and are kind of sifting through what's out there in the industry, the NCUA does have some good stuff, and we have it. We've shared some of it, and we certainly can share any more with you one-on-one if you'd like. So,
got it. Good morning, Leah. How often should we run a warm model, annual or quarterly? Again, I think most of us are going to do our, excuse me, our reserve analysis quarterly. Again, with the warms themselves, I think initially, everyone should run them in, lockstep with what they're doing their comparisons on, right? So I think that's quarterly. I think what many of you already seen, and what we see is for a lot of you is that your warms aren't going to change much, but I think you want to at least demonstrate that before you stop, running them quarterly. So I would say through 2022, I would run your warms, quarterly, and then, make a determination if you can get away with it, doing it semi-annually or annually after you've kind of documented the fact that they haven't changed much. I don't want anybody to open themselves up to criticism for not having initially having up-to-date warms for the calculation. So that would be my recommendation. Since the overdrafts don't have a warm, we're going to assume they behave like other loans in the all other loans consumer loans category, correct? Again, I think that's probably preference. You could certainly do that. You could also break those out and probably treat them as having something shorter, maybe a quarter warm. Again, I think that's a little bit of preference. I think either way would be acceptable. Steve, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I mean, just keep in mind what we're trying to accomplish with each segment, right? Is to estimate what the potential losses are going to be going forward with the overdrafts. Yeah, there's higher risk, but there's a very, very short duration for that. So it's very managed in a pretty short time frame. So unless you're trying to split all those off and handle them on a very granular basis, part of the bucket, knowing that the peer data that you're also comparing to is also treating them as part of that same bucket, right? So you're staying apples to apples if you do keep them in the bucket and treat them the same, because the peer data also does. And so, yeah, you lose a little, but you gain a little as well.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So this next question is back to the warm estimator, and I wanted to pull up at least the screenshot so we understood here. The question is, includes NCUA data. Is it fine for the banks to use that? So let's be clear about what's happening here. The warm data, and part of the reason we included this is here to help you if it does, ignore it if it doesn't. But one of the things that we have, strived to do repeatedly is find industry data to assist everybody. As Steve mentioned earlier, the FDIC has not really done anything on this. The NCUA has. Again, you can ignore it, but at least it's based on actual data. So we included it, and we debated whether or not we should include it or not. And our feeling is that you can certainly ignore it if you want, but at least it is actual live data relevant to what we're talking about. So we included it. I don't think there'll be any issues.
Using a very apples to apples way of doing it as we are. So that's why it was by far more comparable, I guess. Than anything we've seen.
And that's why we included it. And the NCUA, they have committed, at least for now, to updating it and making it, continually valid. So, like I said, we're looking for as many resources to share with all of you as we did. Our determination is we'll share it. You can ignore it if you want, use it if it helps you, but at least it's actual, based on real data. So that was our thought.
Everyone is limited by the data that exists. And so they might push back and say, tell me why it's relevant. And then I would push back and say, show me something that's more relevant.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because with the warms and the prepayment assumptions, right, or excuse me, the prepayment assumptions, it's around reasonable and supportable, right? So the absence of actually having your own data, which we've discussed on these calls before, is a rabbit hole that, you can go down and spend a lot of time, and I'm not sure it's really going to be worth your time and effort. We felt like this was a little bit of a shortcut that was, put together by, again, relevant data, apples to apples data, and by a regulator. Good morning, Jennifer. Auditors are doing our model validation, trying to tie back the peer loss ratio. Is there any plan to provide that in the future? So I'll let Steve talk to this as well, because I think the challenge here is the amount of data that we're trying to get our arms around. If we do it through the Excel add-in tool or in any kind of export. So because you have to think about it, it's peer data for every single loan category and loss history and warm. And so, I mean, you're talking about a spreadsheet that's pretty pretty sizable.
Depends on your peer group, right?
Sure.
If you have a
Either
small
way, though.
handpicked peer group, or yeah, either way. But to get a feel for it, when if you look at the historical analysis tab and you see all that data that we have there interactively, there's 4 times that much data that goes into the final calculation for the one bank. That's why we created the Excel, the data dump, the historical data dump for your bank. You would effectively, you'd be doing that entire data dump for every single bank in your peer group. And depending on how you built your peer group, it might be a dynamic peer group where it would be even more. So anything is doable, for sure. But it's an extremely heavy data load to do it, and it's using all the same steps, all the same methodology that we're using for the individual, for the subject bank, for you, for each individual bank in the peer group. But yeah, if it's something that you absolutely needed, then we would just work with you on a one-off basis to help get you the support and data that you need.
The next is, do you have a tool to help us measure prepay rates in the warm estimator? No, that's one of the reasons why we've offered that, right? Because to essentially calculate your own prepayment rates, right, that's something you're going to have to monitor with payoff activity in the bank. And again, this is an area that we have talked about before, that, it's precision versus accuracy, right? And so our idea is to start with, with the prepayment assumptions that we have. In our initial tool, we were talking about, ranges between 5 and 10%. With the 1 to 4 family, we showed the FHFA data, which showed a reasonable range of between 5 and 20%. So it's an area where you can go down a rabbit hole, do a whole lot of work, and ultimately, the difference between the prepayment rates is probably not going to marginally affect your calculation. And we're just not sure it's worth the extra time and energy on your part to get to that level of granularity. Maybe in years to come it might be, but coming out of the gate, this just was not an area where we felt like banks should spend their time, wasting time and energy. That's why we have worked to try to provide reasonable assumptions for you. It started with the FHFA information. It started with the New York Fed information. It's been enhanced with the NCUA data. Again, all of those things should help you formulate a reasonable and defendable prepayment assumption. And then to Steve's earlier point, if you get pushback on them, then I would ask, what do you define, or what would you find to be more reasonable or supportable? And so again, we'll continue to look for as many industry sources as we can. These are suggestions. You can certainly modify them if you think they aren't relevant to your own bank. But again, we're trying to just bring you information in the hope of not sending you to waste time and energy for your team and your staff. That's, again, not going to marginally impact your calculations. Steve, anything you want to add there?
That's the trick with prepayments are just the amount of data that's necessary, and the fact that it all has to be individual loan level data. Because when you're estimating prepayments, you can't track a call report balance over time, right? That's an open pool that loans come in and go out of the entire call report segment. So you have to take a snapshot of every individual loan at a point in time, track them all individually to see where prepayments are happening and when, and then do that over a whole bunch of different time periods, tracking all your 2017 originated loans quarter by quarter in that segment, and then doing the same thing again at 18 at different historical points in time. So it ends up being a huge amount of data to do a real prepayment study, and it's all loan level data with data points that are coming from your trial balances and coming from your flat file and whatnot. So that's sort of outside of the scope of what we try to do with the tool. Yes, our warm estimator tool has loan level data, but it's a single point in time snapshot, simple loan level data to do the calculation. So the prepayment would just be a whole nother level of analysis. And it's one that we haven't really tackled as a consulting-y type thing or anything. And we are hoping, we're suggesting at this point that you don't try to either, unless you can relatively easily get some prepayment data from your ALM or core provider, which sometimes they can provide that at a call report segment level, and that would obviously be the easiest path if it exists.
Yeah, and just again, as a follow-up to that, so two things, if you're really looking for that data, we know a number of banks, their interest rate risk provider has prepayment assumptions. Again, I think the fundamental point though, zero prepayment rate is going to create a higher and longer WARM. Any type of prepayment assumption is going to lower a WARM. The difference between 7% prepayment and 8 or 9 or 10% prepayment isn't material enough to impact your calculations in a way that in our estimation, we wanted you to spend a whole lot of time trying to do. And so I think that's really at the heart of this, is not sending you or your teams to do work that isn't going to marginally impact your calculation, right? It'll be slightly different, but it's not going to materially affect the calculation. And that was really the rabbit hole we were really trying to prevent. And so instead of that, we have tried to just provide multiple resources on what others are seeing as reasonable and defendable prepayment rates. So hopefully that helps. Mike, if you want to have a conversation about it in greater detail, happy to have that. The next question is an enhancement suggestion. Thanks, Russell. In your upcoming enhancement, can you add a percentage for the plus or minus so they can to our range, so we can see if it's in or outside of our policy range? So, because a lot of times, Steve, there's a threshold, percentage that they'll follow. So it may be just something we can talk about after.
You're talking about like a little materiality type.
Well, no, just on our difference screen. I think what he's asking is on our difference screen that we're changing here, where we have a dollar amount, if we can also show it as a percentage of the previous.
I got you. So yeah, we're showing your total, the ACL that you need, and we're showing that as a percentage of the loan portfolio. Then we also show your actual last period's reserve level. You want to see that as a percentage. And so you see not only the surplus or shortfall in dollars, but also in percentages.
Yes, I believe that's right. Russell, if that's not what you're asking for, just email Steve or I afterwards so we can make sure. But I believe that's what you're asking. So I just want to make sure. All right. So let me see. Let me get back to this chat. All right. So the next question is, can you explain what the alternative solution is in the WARM? So I think
we have a screenshot on there.
Yeah.
If you're talking about just the amortization adjusted WARM alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had it up before. We can pull this
There
back up now. So briefly here, and then we'll go to the next page where you see it in more detail. So the third column, which is a prepayment adjusted. So you do a basic WARM calculation where you simply take stated contractual maturity dates, right? And you're calculating just the average time to maturity for all the loans. Then you make adjustments to that. The adjustment that we've made since the beginning is adjusting for prepayment. So it's a prepayment only adjusted WARM calculation. That results in a certain level of weighted average remaining maturity, let's say 4.22 years in this case for the mortgages. If you also want to take into account amortization, which again is totally acceptable to do, it certainly results in a lower WARM, so it's less conservative. It's a more aggressive WARM calculation, but it is backed by by the newer guidance that we've started receiving from the regulators over the last few months, where we've been seeing them in practice, particularly the NCUA. That's how they're doing the calculations as well. So we wanted to provide an alternative where you could take into account amortization in two different ways, and I'll show you on the next slide what those two ways are, and they will result in a lower WARM. So if your reserve is higher than where you want it to be under CECL, you're trying to find ways to get it down, and you don't want to do it through Q factors. If you want to take a closer look at the WARM and make a more of an amortization adjustment for it, I think that's a totally appropriate place to start.
So Steve, I want to just interject in here real quick.
Yeah.
So again, when we designed our tool, our approach was to be as conservative as possible. And as we've talked about, any type of prepayment assumption or amortization adjustment is going to lower the WARM. As Steve mentioned, the NCUA has kind of commented on this, but it also came up with a lot of our banks who have very large 1 to 4 family portfolios, who felt like from a practical standpoint, the WARMs that were being calculated with our standard warm estimator were just too long. And so in the course of those conversations, we didn't disagree. But again, our position as a provider was to be always conservative first, and then in this case, introduce something that could, be an option. So I just want to make sure everybody understands the context of kind of how this has evolved. All right, so Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, so on the top left there is the way that we've always had the calculation in the initial warm estimator tool, where you have balance information and contractual maturity date information. From that, you can calculate a warm. You can then overlay a prepayment assumption, an annual prepayment assumption to it, and then you get that, let's say 4.22 years. That's a prepayment adjusted warm. Now, there's certainly obviously different levels of granularity. If you're taking into account amortization, what does that mean? Does it mean they're all going to be straight line? Does it mean that there's balloons or no balloons or loan level? So the first step is to make a simple assumption that, all right, we're going to take all the loans, assume all the loans in this bucket amortize on a straight line basis. There's no balloons or anything else. The math that follows there on the bottom left is how you would recalculate the warm to take into account a kind of a universal amortization assumption. And it works because you have a balance each year that's, let's say, starting at 700,000, and that snapshot of loans is going to slowly dwindle until it gets to zero. If we have amortization assumption, in addition to the prepayment assumption, we know the total pay downs for that loan. We can assume the total pay downs for that loan over the course of a year, which means we can calculate the total balance of that exact snapshot of loans as it dwindles down to zero over a few years. And then you can use that data to calculate a warm that includes amortization over time. That's the that's a simple method.
Yeah.
The more granular method is if you want to go into your loan level data and add loan level assumptions about this loan is interest only, this loan amortizes, this one doesn't, or this loan has a $25,000 balloon at the end, which will change the amortization schedule. Or if you just want they want a huge schedule that shows amortization for your whole segment across the board going out over time, because that's what they're used to seeing, this will provide that on the top right, where we're showing each individual loan as it amortizes on an annual basis down to zero, taking into account amortization, balloon payment, prepayment assumption, all that stuff. And then it populates there and shows you the actual schedule on a loan by loan basis, and then adds them all up at the bottom and then does a similar warm calculation. So you can stick with what we've always done on the top left, be conservative, not worry about the nitty gritty. You can make a simplifying assumption about amortization, which is what I would suggest would be your next step, would be on the bottom left. And then on the top right, it's only if you really, really feel like getting into a lot more loan level data, because most of the time, if you spend all that time working on that, it's going to end up being half up, half down. And when you add it all up, it's not going to be a hill of beans of difference, most likely, in the warm calculation. So I would only go that step if they're really pushing hard back on your calculations.
Yeah, and so that gets us back to the summary page, right? And so again, as you can see here, the amortization inclusion, obviously lowers the warm. But as you can see, you can start to get down rabbit holes on granularity, and that was part of the reason why we asked the question. But again, I'm always cautious to, for us to go down rabbit holes that, again, aren't going to materially impact the calculation. As Steve suggested, the amortization comparison, and ultimately you get to decide what you want it to be. But, our position initially was obviously the longer the warm or higher the warm, the more conservative it is. And that's where we started with this. But I think just as we get into this more, there's going to be, requests like this from our users. And so we're going to try to be sensitive to those, and any other guidance that we hear or see, we're going to try to incorporate that into the solution as best we can.
Yeah. And you can make other simplifying assumptions if you can go back for just 1 second, Sean. If you have a segment that you say, well, have a lot of interest only loans here. And so I'd say about half of this segment is amortizing and the other half of it is not. Then you just take an average of the prepayment adjusted and the amortization adjusted. Just average those two warms and say, because half the portfolio is amortizing, the other half isn't.
And so you just end up with like 3.1, just eyeballing it, or something along the lines there. So this is just
Yeah.
data that you can use to make, as long as it's a reasonable assumption, that's what they're doing, a test of reasonableness here, especially at this stage while they're still learning how to examine and audit this type of information.
Yeah, so that's great. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the question, Jennifer. All right, Bruce, I'm going to get back to your, do regulators allow variance from the CECL reserve and the actual reserve, right? I mean, so this is a slippery slope. I would tell you no.
We talked about that with Paul and last time on, and I think we'll probably talk about it with him again, and it's about materiality, right?
Yeah, it's so there's two things, right? There's the policy variance between your own reserve and what it is. I mean, and theoretically, no, there shouldn't be. Are there unallocated parts of your reserve that are technically that, right? So it's a slippery slope. So happy to have a discussion with you in more detail. Again, we'll have hopefully Paul Allen on next month, and we'll talk about that in greater detail. But if you want to have a conversation one-on-one, I think Bruce, happy to do that. But that's a little bit of a slippery slope. I think you should operate under the premise your reserve is your reserve, and what the reserve calls for, we should fund. Certainly
it's what you're getting at it, right? Like if you do a calculation, let's say you have a number in your head and you think it should be $2 million, and you're doing the entire model, you're running CECL, it keeps coming up with 1.9 instead of 2 million, right? That's a difference of 5%. Do you decide to say, well, I'm going to stick with 1.9 because that's what's defensible, that's what's in the model, or is the 2 important enough for me that I add a 5% unallocated on top of the calculated 1.9 to get me to 2? That's a very subjective question, but it's a good one.
Yeah, Steve, I don't know. We skipped through these slides to get to the amortization. So I don't know if you want to just make any comments on the change here to the unfunded commitment page.
No, it's the same concept.
Yeah.
So the idea is that any of the spots that you have to update when you're updating the tool on an ongoing basis, right? When you come in next quarter, all of the historical and peer loss experience is automatically there. You can update it, but the current balance columns, right, where you're saying that the reserve is now has to be as of March 31st instead of my old scenario that here, which still 12/31. If you would have to type in the March 31st balance values. Now we're just trying to automate that so you don't have to go and find them and do that. So it's just a drop down box where you can choose a date and the unfunded commitment values. If it's a call report date and it exists, those values will automatically update. If you're doing it as of a non-quarter end period, you can still type in any date you want to there. Just know that it's not going to override the data unless you choose a call report date, obviously.
Yeah, and just a reminder, anything in blue in our tool you can override.
Right. All the gray cells with blue text is manually overridable.
Just again, we talked about this previously. The ability to upload any of your own documents to the analysis as well is available to you through that file upload button. A lot of you are doing your own narratives or your own Q factors. If you want to include that as part of a scenario, you can.
Or your warm calculation.
Yeah, or your warm calculation.
If you've redone your warm calculations, whether we're helping you with it and providing the Excel spreadsheet, or you're doing it internally, and you just want to attach that to the scenario so that 6 months from now, you can go back, look at the old scenario, see your old warm calculation right there. It's just an organizational tool.
Yeah. We talked about the amortizations. Again, this quarterly loss calculation is available under the Blue Resources CECLSolver Resources tab. This really walks you or an auditor or a regulator through how we actually calculate the net charge-off numbers. Steve, I don't, what?
Yeah, so this is a template that's in there. This is not, there's 2 tools we have for that. This tool doesn't show your data. It shows exactly how the ratios and lifetime loss rates are calculated from data. Then separately, you can export your entire data set and pretty much, if you wanted to, copy and paste it into this spreadsheet. And then the math would work with your data. So it depends on, do you just want to prove to the auditors how it's being calculated, or do you want to look at all your historical data and start walking through it? So 2 separate tools to help you get to that. And again, if you're having more confusion with that or need to reach out, please reach out and we'll help you navigate it.
Yeah, because I know some people are being asked by their auditors to actually, validate, our calculations. So this is our attempt to explain the process. But then, as Steve said, you can borrow the Excel functionality and, really drop your data in here and actually manually do it yourself as well. So,
And again, that was, then there's the stock report as well, which is, and that's what we spend a lot of, the stock report that we have on there. That's what they spend the vast majority of their time when we're getting that stock with the accounting firm, is going through how exactly we are doing those calculations and how they are appropriate and meet industry standards and everything else. So they put us through the ringer on it, but we always understand when you need a little bit more comfort level. And so that's why we provided these as well.
thank you, Steve. So again, these are just reminders. I know we're pushing up on an hour, so I don't want to extend our stay with you to this morning, but these are just, again, we've covered these the last couple of months, just the day one entries, the policies, things to consider. Again, this comes from our previous coffee talk, so these are here for your reference if you want to address them. Again, this is a question that we I hope to get to sooner. Well, we can certainly address it in future coffee talks. Again, I know we've gotten a lot of requests around just, further validation of data manually, et cetera, other types of consultative services that you think might be helpful. We want to continue to enhance the tool. Like I said, this will probably be something we address and continue to address throughout the year, but just be thinking about any areas where you think we can enhance our tool or the service we're bringing to you. We want to make sure we remain, a strong partner for you as you navigate this. So you can certainly submit something now. You can certainly submit something to us after the presentation, but this will be something we address going forward as well. I don't see any additional questions on the drop down. Oh, we got one here. Let me just see before I get to yes, the question is the webinar saved? So it will be. So on likely Tuesday, given the holiday on Monday, we will send out a link to today's presentation, which will include the slides and a audio of the presentation. So you'll be able to reference that. Thanks, Lori, for the reminder. So here are next month's dates. We do have a coffee talk scheduled for March 24th. Like I said, I hope I've been talking with Paul Allen. Hopefully he'll be on here to join us and we can have some more auditor specific answers to questions. We have a demo on the next week, just for anybody again who is just getting started or needs more instruction on the tool itself. But otherwise, I think, Steve, anything and Mustafa, the question on the template, it should have been updated for the unfunded reserve. It's not. It'll go out there this weekend, correct, Steve, or no?
I'm not. It depends on what we're talking about. If it's the drop down box that allows you to update the balances with a different date, that should be there on Monday. If we're talking about, and that's really the only change. There aren't, for unfunded commitments. We already had your, any the calculated ACL that you need for unfunded commitment. And then we already had another row that said what your current value is if you did fill it out on the call reports historically, and then your surplus or shortfall, right? Those were already all in the unfunded commitments page. We just also translated that final value to the summary page, just a direct copy of that value from the unfunded commitments page at the bottom to the summary page. The only thing we're doing is we're removing that transferred value to the summary page because we don't want people confusing the unfunded commitments and the loan ACL. So yeah.
Then just a reminder, we do have our quarterly webinar where we'll talk about year-end 2022 results from the QCBI, and David Ruffin from IntelliCredit will join us talking about credit. Again, that will be Tuesday at 2 Eastern. So if you haven't registered, certainly welcome or encourage you to do that. I think that's everything for today. Thank you all very much for attending. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to us. If there's anything we didn't address, certainly reach out to us. But continue to share feedback, and we'll try to continue to improve CECLSolver as much as we can. Steve, any final comments before we let everyone go?
Give me 1 second, just responding.
Yeah, he's answering a
yeah.
chat, so.
Always multitasking. No, that's all for me right now. Thanks everyone for your participation. The more of these types of questions we get on the call, the less we have to prepare for. No, just kidding. The better it is, I think, for everybody. And thanks for filling out some of those survey questions at the beginning. And hopefully y'all glean some good information from those statistics as well, since we do have so many people on the call today.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all for the participation today. Thanks for continuing to show up to these coffee talks. We'll be back next month, and certainly reach out to the sales team or Steve, with any questions you might have, and they'll incorporate Steve or I as necessary. But thank you all very much. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the long holiday
Thanks, everyone.
holiday weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.